We wrote this with the intention, like Jared said, there would be a lot more newer delegates here. But so it kind of breaks down the legislative branch to its very bare core values. So the objective. It's responsible for the authority and passage of legislation which has been presented before it. And this just goes over the Y core values: caring, honesty, respect, and responsibility. And we wanted delegates to think about what those values really meant to them. These are pretty much the rules for what house you can be in, for what chamber you would be in. So all first-year delegates can only be part of either Reed or Rodney House, and second-year or third-year members, any experienced delegate, can be part of the Senate. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Joey and talk about some of the rules.
All right, so writing your bill is the most important preparation that you're going to do for youth in government, because we won't have anything to do without them. Everything is based on the bills. That's what we'll be debating, and that's what we'll be voting on. So now, you clearly, if this is what we're going to be doing, you want to be something that you're passionate and excited about, so it needs to mean a lot to you, intrigue you, and it has to be something you want to change, because that's the whole point of a bill, is to change something. So first of all, you need to find an issue that is current, relevant to Delaware, and can be addressed by the Delaware government. Now, it's very important that you make sure it is able to be done by Delaware, because youth in government is specifically based on the state level of government. So if you end up having something that's a national issue that can't be addressed by Delaware at all, then you're going to end up looking bad in front of everybody, and you're probably going to be crushed in that debate. So you can find an issue in a lot of places, in Delaware government websites and other states' legislation, also newspapers. You can use anything you want, really, but the thing is you have to be careful when you're going outside of Delaware sources, because as I mentioned earlier, they may not be related to Delaware. So now, arrange your bill. So we need to make sure that the bill is actually something that we can be using. So it needs to be debatable. It can't be too broad, because you're only supposed to be covering one topic. It can't be too narrow, though, because then it's probably not going to be debatable. And so now you want to gather your knowledge. And so one example would be a pro-con list. And then after you have it all together, you can determine your viewpoint. And once you know where you want to go, you can write your bill. But hold on a moment, because there are ban bills, you can't do everything. It has to be a bill passed in the cannot be a bill passed by youth in government in the last 2 years. You'll find a list of those inside of your bill book, delegate manual. They cannot be copied bills, and it cannot be an actual Delaware law or bill that is currently in the books or in the legislative process, and it cannot be an amendment to a bill that's in the legislative process. And again, it cannot be irrelevant to Delaware. Now, you're not actually going to be rejected if it's irrelevant to Delaware, but there's no way you're going to pass it, because everybody knows that the state government can't do anything about it. All right, so now you can write your bill. So, so you have to start with your title. So there are two basic forms for the title. You can either say an Act 2, do what everything is, or you have a title and then an act. So my example, there's a Bill Writing Act. So now your purpose, which would be 1 or 2 sentences. Now your purpose is not saying exactly what your bill is doing step by step. All your purpose is doing is just saying, this is what I want my bill to do. This is the basic change that I want to make. No, that was good. So now you want to have your definitions. This is where you're clarifying your terms. So obviously if it's a really complex word, you want to define it. But sometimes you'll have a more specific word, and it may have a definition that seems obvious, but it could have many definitions. So here you want to narrow it down to what exactly you are talking about.
Can I interject on this? So instead of writing teacher, write public school teacher that teaches 7th to 12th grade. Instead of writing youth, write children aged 12 to 16. Be more specific, because there's a lot of words that just mean something different.
Right, so basically with that, the definitions section, this is where you're basically making it so you don't have to write 15 words every time you mention youth. So now you have your content section. So this is the most important section of the bill, because this is what your bill is actually doing. You're going into detail here on each little piece that the bill is doing, each step, how it's going to affect certain people, and this is probably going to be multiple sections. And now, one important point is that when an action needs to be done, you want to say that it shall be done. And you're not going to say will, you're going to say shall. It's a bit of an outdated term, but that's how Delaware law goes. So, as you can see, all legislative delegates shall write a bill. So now, cost. So it's pretty obvious. It's how much money your bill is going to cost. And if it's going to cost nothing, you want to write that in your bill. So, because if you don't write in your bill, then people are going to immediately start speculating about how much this is going to cost, and they're going to start dragging you down with those questions. So now, finance. So this is how Delaware is going to pay for your bill. And it's usually taxes or fines. And again, if it's not needed, write it. Now make sure you have a solid finance section, because a weak finance section can really just destroy your bill completely. So everything else could be great. You could have rated everybody in the room could agree perfectly with what you want to do, but if you don't have a way to pay for it, then your bill is very unlikely to pass. So now I have penalties. So this is what happens when somebody doesn't do what your bill says to do. And so again, this is basic punishments like fines or prison. Sometimes maybe somebody will lose some office. And again, if you know penalties are needed, you want to write that into your bill. And now we come to the last section of the bill, the effective date. So this is where you're going to say when this bill is going to happen. Because you usually don't want your bill to start right at the passage, because people are probably going to need to prepare for it, and maybe it's a law that you're putting in, and if people are breaking it right now, you don't want to surprise them with that. So make sure you consider everybody's going to prepare for your law and how long it's going to take for the word to get out that you can't do this anymore. And now your bill's good and ready, and you can take it to the hall. Now, pass it over to Conlan.
Yep. So one of the most important things about Party Pro is that it helps keeps things running. It helps keeps things running smoothly. And so what delegates have to do first is introduce themselves, which includes their name, the delegation, and they have to take the chair. When they're done speaking or they're done making their actions, they have to sit down or say, I yield the remainder of my time to the chair. So when you stand up, you have the option to do two actions. The first is to speak, and the second is to reserve your right to do something. You can reserve your right to speak thereafter, and you use that after you ask, will the authors please yield to a possible series of questions? And then you say, and I reserve my right to speak thereafter. That lets you ask questions and then reply with your own speech or something like that. You also have the right to yield the remainder of your time to either the author's summation or to a fellow delegate. In both situations, you have to speak at least half of your speaking time in order to give the rest to another delegate or to the author's summation. One of the biggest things about reserving your right is that you can use it to make a motion.
You can only reserve time to the author's summation if you are the first speaker during pro-con debate.
Yes, or during open debate.
Yeah.
Anyways, here's a list of all the motions you can do. For each different motion, there are different rules. For example, the amendments can only be heard during open debate. You can't interrupt the speaker, and it's only debatable if the author deems it unfriendly. For things like point of order, you can call out, but that's only during open debate and not when the speaker or the president himself are speaking. So yeah, there are a bunch of different motions. With division, that's the only motion that is said after the bill has been passed. And with that, it has to be called within a certain time, and that's between the two gavel taps. So essentially, debate is broken down into a couple of key parts. The first part is the proponency speech, in which the author gives their opening statements. And with that, the author doesn't have to reserve the time to their closing summation, but they do have to introduce themselves. Next, you have the non-debatable technical questions, in which delegates can stand up and ask questions. They do have to introduce themselves. Non-debatable technical questions versus regular questions are different in that non-debatable technical questions are those that can be answered with yes, no, a clarification, or a statistic. After that, we move into lobbyist intent speeches. We always start with the con lobbyist. If one is not present, then we move into the pro speeches. This year, we're adding in time for the chief of staff. And in both situations, lobbyist and chief of staff, they have to stand up, say their name, the delegation, thank the chair, and include the organization in which they're representing. The main part of debate is open debate. So first off, we have a con speaker who gives up the statement, and then we have a pro speaker, and then a con speaker. These three speakers have to stand up and talk. If not, then you have to call on somebody. Debate cannot proceed without these three speakers. Next, the chamber moved into open debate, and in that situation, the speaker or the president chooses delegates to give their statements. Next, we have amendments. So the amendment can either go in two paths. After the amendment has been brought up, and there's a motion in a second, the author can either deem it friendly, in which the amendment becomes a part of the bill, or they can deem it unfriendly, in which, next slide.
Sorry. Do you want to?
Yeah. So once an amendment has been deemed unfriendly, there are a couple things that happen. First, the amendment author and the bill author can gather and talk about, what does this amendment really mean? What did you mean by this? And it really sets things straight. And if after that the bill author still deems it unfriendly, you move into unfriendly bill debate or amendment debate. So first, the amendment author gives a proponency speech, and that's like a pro argument. And then after that, you have the bill authors themselves acting as a con argument, talking about why this amendment should not be passed or why it should not be absorbed into the bill itself. And then lastly, the amendment author gives a closing remarks or a summation speech. And then after that, the chamber itself moves into a standing voice vote, whether to absorb the amendment or to fail it. In either situation, if the amendment passes, then the amendment becomes a part of the bill, and the bill author gets shut down. In the second situation, if the amendment fails, then amendment debate ends, and open debate continues as normally without the amendment tabled. So even if it's a friendly amendment, after 3, it gets put away until later. So because the author already introduced themselves in the proponency speech, they can just start off talking in their summation speech. And that includes the standard 2 minutes and any additional time that either they reserved or another delegate has given to them. After they have given their summation speech, the author stops, and the president or the chair moves to a standing voice vote. First they call aye, and then the ayes stand up, and then they sit down, and then they call the nays, and then the nays sit down, and then that's it. The chair itself doesn't have to count votes. They can just see visually, or they can hear which side had most votes, and then they can make their decision from there. And the standard procedure is you say, in the eyes of this chair, this bill does pass or fail. and then they bang that gavel twice. In the instance where it's kind of a close call, any delegate can say division in between the two gavel taps. And once that is called and the chair sees that it is kind of split, then they go through the whole ayes and nays, except this time both the clerk and the speaker count individually how many ayes and nays there are, and then they go through the whole declaring thing. If there is a tie, the presiding chair makes the call. So that rarely happens, but it's something to keep in mind. Usually the chair votes in favor because you don't want to be the one person that shuts down their bill.
Actually, this is the next slide.
Okay, yeah. So as a voting delegate, you have three things that you can choose: ayes, nays, or abstention. Abstentions are only reserved if you're not in the room for the majority of debate. You do not want your delegates to use abstentions when they don't need to. Especially in delegation meetings, you should tell them soon, because a lot of the times delegates say they abstain mainly because they don't have an opinion. But in the actual conference debate, you need to have your opinion. You need to say, yes, you support it, or no, you do not support it.
And abstention counts as a no vote when they do the count.
Yeah. Now, I'm moving to votes.
So right, this is just going to talk about bill passage. You need a simple majority for the bill to pass. So if there's 10 people, you just need 6 people for the bill to pass. It must pass 2 chambers before it reaches to the youth governor. So it can go to from the Senate to a House, or from 2 houses, or the House to the Senate, which is outlined right there. So if your bill does pass, congratulations. So now you get an audience with the governor. The governor is pretty busy, so I think a page will come down and tell you the governor's ready to hear your bill. When an audience with the governor is granted, the authors and the governor pretty much have a conversation. They justify and defend their bills and discuss the main points with the governor. And in the end, it's up to the governor whether or not he or she wants to pass it or veto it. So the veto process. In my years at YIG, this has never really happened before, but given time, the bill must re-enter both chambers and pass with same parley pro procedures. So pretty much your bill will be redebated in the chambers. It does move to the bottom of the docket though, so if a bill is vetoed, all the other bills need to be heard first before this bill can be heard again. A signed bill. A signed bill becomes a part of the official executive report, and the governor will read the passed bills at the closing ceremony. The executive report is published, and it is also read to the Delaware Legislative Assembly. So all the actual legislators in Delaware Congress will hear all the bills that we passed. And that's Congress.